Good morning and welcome to the April 27th, no, we're wrong, April 27th meeting of the Law and Regulatory Committee. I'll call this meeting to order and have the clerk call roll. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
Here.
And Councilmember Mendonça.
Here. At this time, can I have Mr. Plecker lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rich. Okay, at this time, I will open up our first public comment session. Is there any member of the public who wishes to bring anything up that is not listed on today's agenda? Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the prior meeting.
Councilmember Mendonça.
We don't. Yes.
Yeah. This is a request to approve the minutes of the Law and Regulation Committee meetings of October 27th, 2022 and March 23, 2023. If you wish to approve those, would you please signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, let's see. At this time, we will move into our first item on the agenda, which is 6.1, and I'll turn it over to Mark Walensky.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Mendonça and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. Once again, I'm Mark Walensky. I'm the Government Relations Administrator for the City of Roseville, and I'm joined this morning for today's presentation by Rob Becerra, the Roseville Police Department PIO. The following report includes an overview of several bills and areas of particular focus on public safety, public works, and the federal debt, at the federal level, the debt ceiling limit discussions. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Rob, who will provide a brief overview on public safety bills.
Thank you very much, Mark. It is a very interesting time right now in the Capitol in regards to many of the pieces of legislation we're seeing moving forward in regards to public safety. Once again, one of the ways that we as the government relations team break down the bills of our highest priority are into a few tracking categories. And so the 7 listed here is really our method to try and say, what are the most important or most highlighted kind of areas of focus that we feel have that most impact for our community and our police department. Obviously, number 1 being homeless response, mental health crisis response, and substance abuse and fentanyl. Those 3 are very interconnected that I think we all know and realize. And then, of course, organized retail crime being the retail center that we are, something that we continue to focus on. And then always hiring reform, criminal sentencing reform, things that we continue to track because those are going to have the largest impacts as they roll down and change policy in the state related to the department. So today we're going to highlight 3 key bills that we feel are moving forward, have that significant level of impact, but show just a little bit of the trend for what we're seeing coming out of the Capitol right now. First is a bill that the police department recommends based on our city's platform, which is a support position for this Grove bill related to criminal sentencing around fentanyl. Now, this strengthens the argument that law enforcement and our justice system has when someone decides to deal in fentanyl, specifically related to we see it in the news, the candy-shaped or the colored fentanyl, really done in a way to market it to just a younger audience. And we see the significant impacts with fentanyl-related deaths happening throughout the state, year-over-year increases. Today, it is worth noting the Assembly Public Safety Committee has chosen previously to not hear any bills related to fentanyl, but they changed their tone a little bit. Today there will be a hearing where several fentanyl-related bills will be heard in the Public Safety Committee, and this was largely done just to mounting public pressure to at least put something forward to hear some of these legislative changes. We're interested and going to track the hearing today to see what comes out of it. Hopefully we'll see some movement in some of these fentanyl-related bills. The next is under our category of hiring and reform, which is AB 742. And it has to do with our police canine program. As we can all imagine, police canines are an incredible tool and an incredible resource that we use in the city. We currently operate 6 canine teams, and this piece of legislation is seeking to make an actual pretty significant adjustment to the policy, which is around unleashed canines. And our current policy regarding unleashed canines is actually extremely tight. It's only done in very specific situations, very controlled environments, but taking that option away really would make it challenging for drug searches, for sending a canine in to encourage somebody to come out of a barricaded situation. There are a number of times when a canine is successfully used in these situations where officers are not put in harm's way. So we see a significant risk with this one if it moves forward as it's currently written, and we're recommending that opposed position just based on the impacts that it will have. And then the last is SB 796. This, in recent conversations with our chief and his relationship with one of our parent organizations, Cal Chiefs, or the California Police Chiefs Association, encouraging that we move to a support position here. And this bill has specifically to do with those who choose to make threats in schools or places of worship. As we have seen over the past several years, we see these year-over-year increases with threats and acts of violence that happen in our area schools, in our places of worship. And this just automatically increases penalties for anyone who threatens any religious organization, any school. We're hoping it moves the needle forward to hold those accountable who choose to make threats, but then, of course, much stricter penalties if someone actually does follow through and commit an act of violence in one of these sensitive areas of our community. So those are the 3 pieces that we'll specifically highlight today. We do, again, feel like they're a good broader brush for some of the other pieces of legislation that we're seeing coming down. And again, government relations team will continue to track public safety legislation in partnership with our trade organizations and with the larger state level organizations as well, seeing how we can stay engaged and advocate for those pieces of our position. With that, I'll kick it back over to Mark.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, then with the next number of bills that we're going to look at relate to public works. And the first bill is AB 7, which relates to transportation projects and selection of those projects. This bill would require transportation projects funded through certain sources to incorporate principles to future-proof transportation infrastructure by accommodating new and emerging technologies such as electric vehicle charging stations, renewable energy generation, and broadband deployment and transportation rights of way. The city is taking a watch position on the bill at this time to understand any amendments that are taken on the bill and to further analyze whether the bill would have a negative impact on the selection of potential Roseville transportation projects. With respect to AB 305, this bill would enact the California Flood Protection Bond Act of 2024, which, if approved by the voters, would authorize the issuance of bonds for flood protection project. The city has taken a watch position on this bill to understand what benefits it would provide the city's flood control efforts if it was approved by the voters in a future election. And AB 413, regarding vehicles stopping, standing, and parking, the city's taken a supportive amendment position on this bill. Staff will be submitting amendment language for the author's consideration that this would occur when supported by an engineering study. Staff is concerned that as the bill is currently written, the bill removes flexibility that might be required based on conditions at specific locations. With respect to AB 516, the Mitigation Fee Act, the city has taken an opposed position on this bill due to the increased potential for litigation claims and claims based on the audit process and the timing of an audit and impact on potential projects. With respect to AB 1297, public restrooms, this bill would require each local government to complete an inventory of public restrooms owned and maintained by local governments by the end of 2020, by July 1st of 2024. So the city has taken a watch position on the bill while researching the bill further. Staff has several initial concerns regarding how the information would be used and if it would include further requirements to provide access to these restrooms at times other than during regular business hours. And the final Public Works bill is Senate Bill 617 for public contracts with progressive design build. The city has taken a support position on the bill for the cost benefits a progressive design build format would provide for certain types of projects and the benefits it would provide for future city projects. And then with respect to at the federal level and the debt limit, so as we know, Congress recently returned from spring recess, and the debt limit remains as a critical issue that they will need to address in the coming months. Up until yesterday, there had been very little movement on the House side as far as the GOP's perspective on the budget. They had, shortly after they returned, the GOP did put together a package of priorities, and included in that package was rescinding the unspent COVID-19 funds, capping non-defense discretionary spending at a limit, excluding VA spending, instituting domestic energy production provisions, implementing work requirements for certain safety net programs, and prohibiting student loan forgiveness, among other priorities. Well, during the recent cap-to-cap event, there was movement on this, and yesterday the House GOP, the House passed their budget proposal by a vote of 217 to 215. There were still 4 Republicans that opposed the bill. There were no Democrats that voted for it. However, the vote is merely symbolic, the bill, as it goes to the Senate, is basically dead on arrival in the Senate. However, what this does is it brings both parties to the table to begin negotiating in earnest on what the debt limit would look like and how that will move forward. So we'll continue to watch that very closely, how this continues to unfold, and whether it results in continuing resolution or if there is an actual budget that is passed. But we'll continue to watch this closely and monitor what implications it might have for the city. And so with that, this concludes our presentation, and we're prepared to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rob. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
All very interesting. I see, it looks like maybe 742 regarding the use of police canines. What's the next action for that? It looks like that was heard yesterday or went to suspense file, or?
I don't have an update for you specifically, but I can certainly look and see where it's standing right now.
Okay. That's all. Those are all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you. I had one question on AB 742 as well. So what led up to the authoring of this bill? I mean, is this based more on they believe that training needs to be enhanced? Did this come out of some sort of a lawsuit because they're being unleashed? I mean, I'm just curious what the rationale here was.
I think one of the initial nexus for this bill was the use of canines in crowd control, and something that during, we'll say, kind of previous years of, potential civil unrest throughout the state. This was a mechanism used not by any of our local police agencies, but potentially others throughout the state. And I think that was the primary driver behind putting this forward. And I think it's taken the shape that it has now, just based on, continued refinement for, what they feel is not using dogs as that weapon of force.
Okay.
I can also add that there were some groups that felt that there was that dogs were being used disproportionately against communities of color, and so that there was that concern. And I've heard some discussions where that there might be some amendments that might be brought forward. So during the training of dogs, if this were to continue to be utilized, that during the training of dogs, that the environment that the dogs are trained in and something as simple as the clothing that is being used is modified, so it doesn't, so a dog doesn't have a predisposition to go after a different color or density.
So there is a training component involved in it? Okay, great. All right, thank you very much. At this time, I will open it up to public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comments, and we will move on to item 6.2, which is our electric department priority legislation.
Good morning, Chairman Danza, Vice Mayor Bernasconi. I'm going to go over the Electric Department's report, starting with AB 914 by Assemblywoman Friedman. Sorry, really quickly, just briefly, here's a few of the things that we're planning to touch on today. Electrical infrastructure bill related to CEQA exemptions, wildfire mitigation plans, including vegetation inspections, electric vehicle charging infrastructure timelines, disconnection of residential service, carbon dioxide removal program, and the renewable energy and zero carbon resources. So those are some of the big overarching themes that we'll touch on today. Next slide. AB 914 now by Assemblywoman Friedman deals with electrical infrastructure, and primarily what this bill is designed to do is to exempt from CEQA certain electrical infrastructure projects, mainly related to substations and line facilities. And this is intended to accommodate the increased electrical demand associated with building and transportation electrification, as well as the interconnection of certain renewable energy and distributed energy resources. The bill also requires the state agency in charge of the environmental review for the electrical infrastructure to approve or deny a project within 2 years. And then they would have to report to the legislature if they didn't meet that timeline. Amendments to this bill implemented this week essentially remove the CEQA exemption language, which I think is what the proponents are mostly interested in the bill for. So now the bill really just addresses the 2-year timeline. But I know that there is some interest in trying to get those CEQA exemptions back into the bill as the legislative process moves forward. So at this time, I think we're generally supportive of where the author is heading in trying to streamline electrical infrastructure projects. But we're continuing to have a watch position on the bill, given the fluid nature of kind of all the amendments that are going through. Next slide is AB 1155 by Assemblyman Flora related to vegetation management inspections. And this bill requires our plans for vegetation management to meet a new visual assessment standard to identify obvious defects or conditions that are likely to result in a tree or a tree part failure. The bill establishes a rebuttable presumption for publicly owned utilities that a relevant standard of care has been met and codifies a standard of care for pre-inspection work. This new visual inspection requirement could lead to publicly owned utilities needing to hire another company to perform vegetation management inspections. And I think as a practical matter, we generally inspect our lines on a regular basis at this time. At this time, the department is watching this bill as it does not appear to be moving through the legislative process, but we will keep the committee apprised if the legislation begins to move forward. This bill was recently pulled from a committee hearing, so we'll see if it continues to stay or if it has any legs going forward with some of the new deadlines that are coming up. AB 1482, this has to do with electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We have a watch on this bill for now, but we have been actively engaging in amendments. This bill would establish for local publicly owned utilities an average service energization time for electric vehicle charging infrastructure of 125 business days. And it would require us to report annually a lot of information to the California Energy Commission on this energization timelines. We are concerned with the timelines in this bill because they do not take into account supply chain constraints or other disruptions. So we've been working closely to amend this bill to include those kind of disruptions that could occur. And we're also seeking that the 125-day business target be a consideration point at the local level rather than a set statewide standard. So we'll continue to update the committee on the progression of these amendments as we continue to move forward. Next is SB 57, and this has to do with disconnection of residential service. This bill would have required a local publicly owned utility, gas corporation, water corporation, or local agency that owns a public water system to postpone disconnection of a customer's residential service for non-payment of a delinquent account when the National Weather Service predicts that the temperature will be 32 degrees or cooler or 95 degrees or warmer within our service territory during the 24 hours after a service disconnection would occur. And it requires several notification procedures as well as creating an online reporting system for violations. Electric utilities would also have to report annually to the California Energy Commission regarding the number of disconnections for non-payment of delinquent accounts. Temperatures in the summer months in Roseville frequently exceed 95 degrees, so we were concerned that that customers could see a prolonged period of disconnections during this time. And Roseville already has a practice in place not to disconnect customers during high heat days. So we actively worked with our trade associations and the Environmental Utilities Department in amending this bill, focusing on keeping control over this issue at the local level. I'm happy to report that the author has decided to make this a 2-year bill, which means we'll have more time to work on it, and potentially next year they could decide that the bill needs to do something else or go a different direction. So we think that our utility advocacy and working together jointly between electric and environmental utilities was key in this outcome. SB 308 is related to carbon dioxide removal and market development, and this bill would require the California Air Resources Board to develop rules to certify carbon dioxide removal processes to create negative emission credits. So this bill also directs the CARB to adopt regulation that requires entities like us to purchase negative emissions equal to a portion of our GHG emissions in each calendar year. The obligation phases over time with a minimum 1% of emissions in 2030, and then this increases to 100% of emissions by 2045. This is on top of the cap and trade program that we already participate in, and we see that this could have significant impacts to the utility, especially financially. So we have a watch position on this bill for now because we do expect that there'll be significant opposition from the business community, but it's one that we'll continue to watch to see if it continues to have legs as we move through the legislative process. And then finally, SB 664, this is renewable energy resources and zero carbon resources. We have an opposed unless amended position on this bill through our trade associations. And this bill would require the California Energy Commission to perform a 1 in 40-year peak demand forecast in the Integrated Energy Policy Report. And this bill also limits what resources would qualify for the newly created Distributed Electricity Backups Assets Program, DEBA, and the Demand Side Grid Support Program, DSGS. And this would limit resources to RPS eligible and zero carbon resources for contracts entered into after January 1 of 2024. We are concerned that considering a 1 in 40-year forecasting process may not add much value given the long lead time that they're looking at there. We do think that forecasting of extreme weather makes sense, but a 1 in 40-year standard may not render a meaningful assessment. And then the new restrictions on the DEBA and DSGS programs is also concerning. These programs were pretty much created to add additional flexibility for the state to maintain reliability during needed times. So we think limiting that to specific resources is problematic for the ultimate point of what those programs were created for. And then also the CEC is already discussing a loading order for what resources would go first under that program. So we're working alongside our trade associations to oppose this legislation unless amended. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Amber. Vice Mayor Bernasconi?
Thank you for all of this. I think that this is a question probably for Mark, and I probably should have asked this a few months ago, but our position, the city's positions that they take, how does the city go on record? Is that through your office? Is that through our lobbyist? Like, we take these positions, but how is that really conveyed?
So there's a number of different ways that can happen. So the government relations team will, once we go through all of the bills and talk to all of the departments and the divisions and get their input, then we prioritize those bills, and we will have a whole list of bills that we're just watching, as we talked about today, to understand what amendments are taken and how the bill moves through the legislative process. And what changes occur to the bill. But for those bills that we're taking support or oppose positions, or support or oppose unless amended positions, we can do that a number of different ways. As Amber mentioned, in some cases we're doing it through the trade associations. So we're working with the trade associations, and we're informing them that we've taken, that the city is opposed to that bill or supports that bill. Other times we're doing it. And in addition, we can also do that through our state lobbyists. So we'll inform Gonzalez and Sons. Environmental Utilities has, in addition to Gonzalez and Sons, we also have Gualco on board to help with EU-related issues, and then also through the trade association. So we'll informed through that process. And then when we want to formalize that, we'll send letters in. The mayor will sign letters, and we'll send those letters in to the author. We'll send them into the committees. We'll send them to our legislators as well. So they're informed of the city's process. So it's multi-levels. And some of the determinations that go into that are, for some issues, we're more effective supporting our trade associations as opposed to coming out and being at the forefront of taking particularly an opposed position on some of the bills. But so that goes into the determination of when do we want to formalize it with a letter? Do we want to take that position through our trade associations? It all goes into the development of that strategy for that bill. And that can change over the course of the legislative calendar. There'll be times where we may have an opposed position on a bill, and we'll take a formal position on that bill. And there'll be amendments that are taken that'll allow us to remove our opposition to that bill. And if we've taken a formal position and sent a letter in, we'll also then send in a letter to the author or to those, to the committee or others that we've sent letters to, informing them that we've removed that opposition for these reasons. The flip side of that is that if we've taken a watch position and there are amendments, or if we've taken a support position and there are amendments that are taken that change our position, then we're also monitoring and making those changes throughout the course of the legislative session as well. So,
Got it. Okay. I think my question was more for when it's early on in the watch process or, oppose or support unless amended. I just think it's really important that I know you know this, but just going on the record early, because I feel like it's harder to get something changed if we're not.
Not necessarily. In actuality, and I was just having this conversation with our state lobbyist last week on a couple of bills, and the recommendation for the strategy was, well, let's wait and see what happens if it makes it to the second house, because when it makes it to the second house is really where the hard work is going to happen. So oftentimes in the first house, the bill is, there are amendments being taken on the bill, the author is having conversations, and in some cases, as Amber just described to you, in some cases the author is going to pull the bill and make it a 2-year bill. And so if we're going on record early on, it just might not be the best strategy at that point in time. So there certainly are bills where it is best, and you've seen, Amber mentioned a couple bills, Rob mentioned a couple bills, I mentioned a bill, where we've taken positions already early in the process. But clearly on some bills, and that's where the strategy discussions come in and are so critically important to it, because sometimes if you get out in front of a bill, you can harm your position, or you can harm or diminish the effectiveness of what you're trying to accomplish. And so collectively, when we're working together as a government relations team, and then with our partners, and then with our lobbyists, to construct that strategy for not only the individual bills, but for the city's package.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Welcome.
It's funny Vice Mayor Bernasconi would bring that up, because great minds must think alike, because you and I asked Mark that exact question day before yesterday. So always good to get the background on that. I was really excited to hear our position on SB 664. I had done a little bit of research on that. That's going to be a very interesting one to watch, and could get scary depending on which direction that goes. So I'm glad that we're engaged on that and opposing that as it is written at this particular point. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, I will open it up to public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we will move on to our next item on the agenda, which is 6.3, our Environmental Utilities Department Priority Legislation Update. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Donza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. I'm Sarah Boudreau with the Environmental Utilities Department, filling in for Noel today. Noel is currently in Sacramento testifying before the California Air Resources Board as they're set to vote on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation today. So this morning, I will be covering state legislation dealing with droughts, cause operational constraints, and extended producer responsibility. We also have some exciting news to share on the federal front. The first measure I will cover this morning is AB 1573 by Assemblymember Friedman. This bill would require the Department of Water Resources to update the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, commonly referred to as MWELO, to require native plant species, and it would prohibit the use of non-functional turf in non-residential landscapes as of January 1st, 2026. In turn, Roseville will need to update our ordinance to be in compliance, so EU is coordinating with MARC on this measure as we work to determine a position. The next bill is SB 659, which is being sponsored by the Sacramento Regional Water Authority. As we have seen, the state has been focused solely on conservation during droughts. Roseville supports an all-of-the-above approach that includes the development of new water resources to build a water-resilient future for all of California. SB 659 seeks to create and expand upon groundwater storage and recovery projects throughout the state by setting a statewide goal of annually recharging groundwater basins with 10 million acre-feet when water resources are available. Moving on to operational constraints, the next measure is AB 1072 by Assemblymember Wicks. This bill would require urban water suppliers and wholesalers to offer water conservation programs to low-income residents by January 1st, 2025, and provides such programs may be offered through a residential water conservation and efficiency program so long as 40% of the funds are allocated to low-income customers and disadvantaged communities. In our case, since we already have a program in place, we would just need to update this to come into compliance with the new mandate. We have two major concerns with AB 1072, and the first is potential conflicts with Proposition 218, and secondly, being able to meet that 40% threshold going to low-income and disadvantaged communities, or the city would not be eligible to access state assistance in the future. The author's intent of the bill is to target the often harder to reach low-income and disadvantaged populations. These populations are typically renters and oftentimes live in apartments. Staff is working through our statewide trade associations to develop suggested amendments that will help the author achieve her intended goal while not placing water agencies in a position to violating Proposition 218. The next two bills I'm going to be discussing fall under the category of extended producer responsibility. As the state has embraced the use of solar power and placed new requirements on housing developments to include solar on each new home built, there is currently no plan in place to deal with their disposal or recycling at the end of their useful life. These two bills are attempting to build that structure. AB 2 by Assemblymember Ward would place new requirements on manufacturers or their sales agent to develop a plan for the safe, convenient, and environmentally sound management and recycling of the solar panels that they offer for sale in California. AB 1238, also by Assemblymember Ward, would require the Department of Toxic Substance Control to develop alternative management standards for solar panels and their components. This is necessary as there are parts and components that contain materials that are often considered hazardous. While neither bill is developing a true EPR program, staff is reviewing the two bills and working with the California Product Stewardship Council, which we are members of, to determine the best path forward to address the best disposal and recycling methodologies for solar panels. The last bill I will cover this morning is H.R. 1181 by Representative Garamendi. This bill is updating the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, commonly referred to as NPDES permits. In California, NPDES permits are also referred to as Waste Discharge Requirements, or WDRs. These permits regulate discharges to waters of the United States. The NPDES permit program applies to pipes and man-made ditches. Examples of pollutants include, but are not limited to, rock, sand, dirt, and agricultural, industrial, and municipal waste that are discharged. Currently, the maximum number of years that a permit can be issued is for 5 years. So if this bill were to go into effect, that could be extended for up to 10 years, which better reflects project construction timelines for public agencies. So the final item I have for you this morning is an update on our community project funding request that we submitted to our federal delegation. We're excited to share with the committee that Senator Padilla has submitted both of the projects as part of his appropriations requests. We're very early in the process, and there's still quite a few steps to go in the appropriations process before we will know if these projects will officially receive their funding. And we appreciate and we anticipate the passage of the appropriations bill in the fall, but this is definitely a positive first step. And then Mayor Holdeshell, on behalf of the City Council, has sent a thank you letter to Senator Padilla for his support. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Well done. Vice Mayor Bernasconi?
I don't have any questions. A lot to cover. Thanks for the information.
I had one question on AB 2. So in the language that you popped up there, and I know that it's condensed, you took a summary of what the actual language in the bill probably is. But in there it says the manufacturer or agent would be required to create a safe recycling program. So most of those solar panels, much like the batteries in electric cars, I mean, some of the earlier Priuses and other types, they have a 10, 20-year span, solar panels, depending on their age or if they get damaged or a home gets re-roofed or if a homeowner buys a house with existing solar and those need to be replaced. If the manufacturer or the agent is no longer in business, does that responsibility now fall on the homeowner to find a responsible way to recycle those, or does it prevent them from upgrading that solar because there's nowhere to put them? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, but I'm happy to research that further for you and get back to you.
I would just be curious because we do have so many of our residents and new home builds coming online that are going to be solar options. And I just want to make sure that if we have residents that are buying existing homes or new builds that may have solar panels, that there's something in place where they aren't getting stuck with the recycling or the potential fees that mitigate the recycling of these items.
Great point. I'll get back to you on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this time, I will open this up for public comments. Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back up here for any final comments.
I was thinking this morning as I was driving in, it felt like we just met. But apparently it's been a month. But it's really, this like probably, I mean, everything that the city does important, but this is really priority for the city and our government relations and our advocacy being a full-service city, that it's right that it's once a month. There's a lot to cover that's happening down in Sacramento. So thank you all for your dedicated and watchful eye on all of this.
Thank you. Anything from the city attorney's office?
No.
All right. It's always good when the city attorney's office doesn't have a lot of updates related to government items. All right. At this time, we will stand in adjournment until our next meeting,
May
which
25th,
will be May 18th.
May 25th,
May 27th. Yes.
25th.
25th. Third time's a charm. We're stand adjourned until May 25th. Thank you very much.
Make sure that's in my calendar.